There is something in the gaze of certain people that disturbs. It is not arrogance or superiority, but a stillness that destabilizes. While the world moves in automatic patterns, repeating the same emotional scripts, the same justifications, the same escapes, there are those who simply stop. And in that stopping, in that deep silence that dwells within them, a collective discomfort is born that is rarely named but always felt. Ibn Arabi, the 12th century Sufi mystic, understood something that most prefer to ignore, that awakening is not a social blessing, but an intimate exile. Those who cross the veil of appearances, who look beyond the masks and touch, even for an instant, the truth of their own existence, become uncomfortable mirrors for those who still sleep. Not because they judge, not because they point, but because their mere presence recalls what has been lost, what has been buried under layers of conditioning, fear, and conformity. We live in a world that rewards distraction, that celebrates noise, speed, accumulation. A world where being busy is synonymous with being alive, where thinking too much is dangerous, where feeling deeply is weakness. In this context, a conscious person is an anomaly. They do not fit the frenetic rhythm. They do not buy the same illusions. They do not settle for the superficial answers that pacify the masses. When someone awakens, even partially, they begin to question what others take for granted. Not from adolescent rebellion or intellectual cynicism, but from a much deeper and more dangerous place, from honesty. And honesty, that radical honesty that does not negotiate with convenience, is perhaps the most disruptive force that exists. Ibn Arabi spoke of the states of the heart, of how human beings can inhabit different levels of perception. Most live at the level of forms, trapped on the surface of things, identified with their roles, their possessions, their personal narratives. But there are those who break that identification, those who begin to perceive the transience of everything they once believed solid. And when that happens, something changes irreversibly. That person can no longer pretend in the same way. They can no longer participate in empty conversations with the same ease. They can no longer celebrate superficial victories or fear trivial defeats. It is not that they become indifferent. On the contrary, they become more sensitive, more permeable. But their sensitivity is tuned to a different frequency, one that captures dimensions that others have learned to ignore. And this is where the discomfort begins. Because when you are in front of someone conscious, your unconsciousness becomes evident. Not because they tell you, not because they show you, but because their way of being in the world, their way of listening, of looking, of responding from silence rather than reaction, reflects everything in you that remains fragmented. It reflects your haste, your anxiety, your need for validation. It reflects the lies you tell yourself, the fears you deny, the truths you avoid. It is not a judgment. It is a mirror. And mirrors, when they are clean, when they reflect without distortion, can be unbearable. Ibn Arabi knew that awakening is not a romantic event. It is not a moment of permanent illumination where everything resolves and peace descends like a celestial mantle. Awakening is a process of continuous disintegration and reconstruction. It is losing the certainties that defined you. It is releasing the stories that gave you meaning. It is facing the void that was always there, but that you kept occupied with noise. And when someone goes through that process, even in its early stages, they can no longer inhabit the world in the same way. They can no longer believe in the same promises. They can no longer surrender to the same distractions. Their presence becomes unsettling because it reminds others that there is a depth they have been avoiding. The world needs everyone to participate in the collective illusion. It needs everyone to believe in the same fictions, to pursue the same goals, to measure themselves with the same metrics, because only then does the system sustain itself. Only then does the machinery work. But when someone exits that trance, when someone refuses to keep playing the game, they create a crack. And cracks, however small, threaten the structure. Conscious people disturb because they do not need what the world offers in the way the world expects them to need it. They do not seek approval in the same form. They do not fear rejection with the same intensity. They do not compete for recognition with the same desperation. Their center of gravity has shifted inward, and that makes them unpredictable, uncontrollable. It is not that they are superior. It is not that they have reached some inaccessible, mystical state. They have simply touched something real amid so much fiction, and that experience has transformed them. They have felt, even for an instant, what it is to be alive without the constant mediation of the ego. They have experienced moments of pure presence where the past and future cease to exist, where only the now remains, vast and incomprehensible. And after that, how can you take trivial concerns seriously again? How can you be anguished about what others think when you have felt the immensity of your own existence? How can you lose yourself in emotional dramas when you have seen the transitory nature of all emotions? You cannot. And that impossibility creates distance. Ibn Arabi described the knowers of God, those who had crossed the veil, as beings who lived in the world but not of the world. They participated in daily life, fulfilled their responsibilities, interacted with others, but there was something in them that remained untouched, something that observed from a place of deep stillness. That stillness is what disturbs, because in a world addicted to movement, to reaction, to drama, someone who dwells in stillness becomes a reminder of what has been lost. They become a silent witness to the collective madness, and no one wants witnesses. No one wants to be reminded of their unconsciousness. No one wants to feel that they are asleep while others have awakened. So the natural response is rejection, marginalization, mockery, labeling that person as strange, disconnected, too serious, too deep, too different. But what is really being rejected is not the person. It is the mirror. It is the reflection of one's own emptiness. It is the discomfort of recognizing that perhaps, just perhaps, there is something beyond the surface on which we have built our lives. Conscious souls disturb because they live from the question, not from the answer. They do not have the certainties that reassure. They do not offer the easy solutions that calm anxiety. They inhabit paradox, contradiction, mystery. And mystery, in a culture that demands explanations for everything, that needs control and prediction, is a threat. When you speak with someone who has awakened, even partially, you notice something. There is a pause before they respond, not because they do not know what to say, but because they are truly listening. They are present in a way that most are not. They are not thinking about their next intervention while you speak. They are not projecting their own stories onto yours. They are simply there, with you, in that moment. And that presence, that full attention, can be disconcerting. Because we are accustomed to superficial interactions, to conversations where no one really listens, where everyone waits their turn to talk about themselves. When someone truly listens to you, when they look at you without judgment, but with clarity, something in you feels exposed. Ibn Arabi taught that true knowledge is not intellectual. It is not found in books or doctrines. It is found in the heart that has been polished by experience, by conscious suffering, by direct encounter with the real. And that encounter transforms the way you perceive everything. People who have had that encounter can no longer pretend that material success is enough. They can no longer pretend that superficial relationships fulfill them. They can no longer ignore the existential void that underlies all human activities. They have seen through the illusions, and even if they wanted to, they cannot believe them in the same way again. This does not mean they become bitter or nihilistic. On the contrary, many find a deeper joy, a peace that does not depend on external circumstances. But that peace is not compatible with the constant agitation of the world. That joy is not based on accumulation or external validation, and that makes them incomprehensible to those who still seek their value outside. The world prefers those who remain asleep, those who consume without questioning, those who compete without reflecting, those who move without stopping, because those people maintain the status quo. They do not create turbulence. They do not ask uncomfortable questions. They do not reflect inconvenient truths. But conscious souls cannot avoid creating turbulence, not because they seek it, not because they have an agenda, but because their very existence is a reminder that there is another way to live, a way that is not based on fear, a way that does not depend on external approval, a way that finds meaning in depth, not on the surface. And that, in a world built on shared illusions, is revolutionary. Ibn Arabi spoke of the path of love, but not romantic or sentimental love. He spoke of love as a force of perception, the love that dissolves separations, the love that sees the divine in everything, the love that does not judge because it understands. And when someone begins to see with those eyes, their relationship with the world changes radically. They no longer see enemies, but mirrors. They no longer see obstacles, but teachers. They no longer see the world as something separate from themselves, but as an extension of their own consciousness. And from that perception, the struggles of the ego lose their intensity. Personal dramas reveal themselves for what they are, stories the ego tells to keep itself alive. But this perspective is not comforting for those still identified with their stories. For them, someone who has transcended the drama is not inspiring, but threatening. Because if the drama is not real, if suffering is optional, if identity is a construction, then what remains? Who am I without my stories? These questions are too big, too destabilizing. So it is easier to reject the messenger than to face the message. Conscious people disturb because they have no fear of silence. They can be alone without feeling lonely. They can exist without needing constant validation. And in a culture that equates loneliness with failure, that measures value by the quantity of superficial connections, someone who dwells comfortably in their own company is an anomaly. It is not that they are antisocial. Many have deep and meaningful relationships. But those relationships do not come from need, but from choice. They do not seek others to fill a void, because they have begun to reconcile with that void. They have discovered that the void is not something to fear, but a space of infinite possibility. Ibn Arabi spoke of fana, the annihilation of the ego, not as a violent destruction, but as a gradual fading of identification with the temporal. When the ego begins to dissolve, what remains is pure consciousness, the witness that observes without attachment. And from that place of witness, everything looks different. The problems that once seemed monumental reveal themselves as transitory. The people who once provoked intense reactions are seen with compassion. The world that once seemed solid and objective is perceived as fluid and subjective. But living from that place of witness while interacting with those still completely identified with their stories creates friction, because you are responding from a space of clarity and they are reacting from a space of conditioning. You see patterns and they see unique problems. You see the play and they are lost in the character. You cannot explain to them what you see. Words do not reach. Only direct experience can reveal what awakening means. And that experience cannot be forced or transferred. Each soul must make their own journey, face their own demons, traverse their own dark night. What conscious souls can do is exist. Simply be. Not preach. Not convince. Just live from a place of authenticity, knowing that their presence is enough, knowing that some will see and resonate while others will feel threatened and distance themselves. And both responses are perfect, because awakening is not for everyone at the same moment. Each being is at their own point in the journey. Some are ready to question, others need more time in the illusion, and the conscious soul respects that, not because they are indifferent, but because they understand that each consciousness has its own rhythm. Ibn Arabi wrote that God is the mirror in which the human being sees himself, and the human being is the mirror in which God contemplates himself. This reciprocity, this dance of reflections, means that every encounter is sacred. Every person you cross is a reflection of some aspect of yourself that you need to see, and when a conscious person interacts with you, they are offering you a reflection, not the reflection your ego wants to see, but the reflection your soul needs. And that reflection can be beautiful, or it can be painful. It can confirm you or it can challenge you, but it will always be true. Truth is what disturbs most, because truth does not negotiate. It does not adapt to our preferences. It does not adjust to our narratives. Truth simply is. And when someone lives from truth, even imperfectly, they become a catalyst for those around them. Some will feel inspired. They will see in that person the possibility of their own liberation. They will see that it is possible to live differently, think differently, be differently, and they will begin their own journey toward consciousness. Others will feel threatened. They will see in that person an implicit judgment about their own choices. They will see a reminder of everything they have been avoiding, and they will respond with resistance, with rejection, with hostility even. And both responses are understandable, because awakening is losing everything you thought you knew. It is dying before dying. It is facing the abyss within you, and not everyone is ready for that journey. Not everyone wants to pay that price. Conscious souls have paid that price. They have crossed through the fire of transformation. They have faced their shadows. They have released their certainties, and they have emerged different, not better, just different, more transparent, more vulnerable, more real. And that reality is what the world fears, because the world is built on carefully maintained fictions, on collective consensuses that no one questions, on shared illusions that give the sensation of security. When someone refuses to participate in those illusions, the entire structure trembles. Ibn Arabi taught that true love is the capacity to see God in everything, to recognize the divine in every form, in every experience, in every moment. And when you see that way, when you perceive the inherent sacredness in existence, you can no longer treat it carelessly. You cannot live mechanically when you have seen the miracle of being alive. You cannot relate superficially when you have recognized the depth in every being. You cannot pursue the trivial when you have touched the eternal. And that impossibility, that incapacity to return to unconsciousness is what marks conscious souls. It is not that they are special. It is not that they have reached some superior state. They have simply seen something they cannot stop seeing. They have tasted something they cannot forget, and that taste has changed their appetite forever. They are no longer satisfied by the distractions that satisfy others. They no longer find meaning in the activities that give meaning to others, not from arrogance, but from genuine transformation. Their palate has changed, and they cannot pretend to enjoy what no longer resonates with them. This radical honesty is what disturbs most, because we live in a world of social courtesies, of white lies, of carefully constructed masks. We all pretend to be fine when we are not. We all feign certainty when we are full of doubts. We all project confidence when we are terrified. But conscious souls have released those masks. Not all at once, not perfectly, but significantly. And when you interact with someone who is not pretending, who is not playing a role, who is simply being, it creates an uncomfortable contrast with your own performance. You realize how much energy you spend maintaining the facade. You realize how tired you are of pretending. You realize that perhaps, just perhaps, you too could release the masks, but that is frightening. Because if you release the masks, who remains? What remains? Ibn Arabi would respond that everything remains, that behind the masks there is not emptiness, but fullness, that your true self is not something you need to construct, but something you need to discover, something that has always been there, waiting to be recognized. But that discovery requires courage. It requires willingness to face what you have been avoiding. It requires brutal honesty with yourself. And not everyone is ready for that. Not everyone wants that. And that is okay. Conscious souls are not here to save anyone. They are not here to convince anyone. They are here to live their truth, knowing that their truth may inspire or may threaten, but will always be a gift. A mirror offered without expectations. Some will look in the mirror and see possibility. Others will look and see condemnation. But the mirror remains neutral. It only reflects what is there. The world needs conscious souls. It needs beings who remember what has been forgotten, who keep alive the flame of authenticity amid the sea of conformity, who demonstrate that it is possible to live differently. But the world will also fear those souls. It will marginalize them. It will misunderstand them. It will reject them. Because their existence questions everything the world holds as true. And in that rejection, in that misunderstanding, there is an invitation to each sleeping soul to awaken, an invitation to release comfortable certainties and embrace uncomfortable mystery, an invitation to die to what you believe you are, to discover what you really are. Not everyone will accept the invitation, but it will be there, silent, constant, waiting for the moment when the pain of remaining asleep becomes greater than the fear of awakening. Because that is the secret that conscious souls know, that awakening is not optional forever, that sooner or later in this life or another, each being will face the truth of their own existence. They will face the void they have been filling with distractions. They will face the questions they have been avoiding with borrowed answers. And in that confrontation, in that final surrender to what is, they will find what they have always been seeking, not in the external world, but in the deep stillness of their own being. Ibn Arabi knew it. The mystics of all traditions have known it. Today's conscious souls know it. And their discomfort is not a problem to solve, but a reminder to honor. A reminder that there is more, that you can awaken, that the life you live is not the only possible life. That behind all your stories, all your roles, all your identities, there is a vast and immortal presence waiting to be recognized. There is a curious phenomenon that occurs when a soul begins to awaken. At first, there is enthusiasm. There is the impulse to share what has been discovered, to awaken others, to save the world from its collective dream. But over time, that impulse dissolves, not from cynicism or indifference, but from understanding. The understanding that each person is exactly where they need to be, that suffering is not a mistake to correct, but a necessary teacher, that unconsciousness is not the enemy, but the prior state required for awakening to have meaning. Ibn Arabi spoke of degrees of perception. He said that each level of consciousness has its own validity, its own perfection within the divine design. The one who sleeps dreams the dreams they need to dream. The one who awakens sees what they need to see. And both states are sacred. But this understanding does not eliminate mutual discomfort. The one who sleeps still feels threatened by the one who awakens, and the one who awakens still feels the loneliness of seeing what others do not see. It is a strange loneliness, because you can be surrounded by people and still feel profoundly alone, not because you are different, but because you inhabit a reality that few recognize. Conscious souls develop a kind of existential bilingualism. They learn to move between two worlds. They can participate in conventional conversations, fulfill social expectations, function in the world of forms. But a part of them remains anchored in something deeper, something that cannot be verbalized in common language. This duality is exhausting. You are constantly translating, constantly adapting, constantly deciding how much you can reveal without creating more distance. It is a delicate dance between authenticity and adaptation, between being true to your truth and maintaining connections with those who do not yet see it. And sometimes you wonder if it is worth it, if it would not be easier to go back to sleep, to forget what you have seen, to return to the comfort of unconsciousness. But you cannot. Once you have crossed a certain threshold, there is no return. Lost innocence cannot be recovered. Awakening, however fragmented, is irreversible. Ibn Arabi wrote about sacred perplexity, that state of not knowing that is born when certainties dissolve, but definitive truth has not yet been revealed. Conscious souls inhabit that perplexity. They do not have the answers they once had. They do not believe in simplistic explanations, but neither have they reached total clarity. They live in the intermediate space, in the limbo between sleep and complete awakening. And that space is uncomfortable, not only for them, but for those around them. Because people want certainties. They want definitive answers. They want you to tell them that everything will be fine, or that nothing matters. But conscious souls cannot offer those certainties. They can only offer deeper questions. And questions, especially those without easy answers, are profoundly disturbing. There is a paradox in the path of awakening. The more conscious you become, the more vulnerable you become, because consciousness dissolves defenses. It dissolves the psychological armor you built to protect yourself from the world. You become more permeable, more sensitive, more open, and in a world that values invulnerability, that rewards hardness, that confuses sensitivity with weakness, that openness is dangerous. You expose yourself to being hurt in ways you did not even perceive before. You feel the pain of the world more acutely. You experience human disconnection with greater intensity. Conscious souls carry that weight, not because they are martyrs or because they seek suffering, but because expanded consciousness inevitably includes more pain along with more beauty. You see both sides with greater clarity, and you cannot choose to see only one. Ibn Arabi spoke of the heart as an instrument of perception that can expand infinitely. He said that the heart of the Gnostic is so vast it contains all universes. But that vastness comes with a price, because a heart that can contain everything also feels everything. It feels joy and sadness with equal intensity. It feels connection and separation as simultaneous experiences. It feels love and pain as two faces of the same coin. And living with that intensity, with that constant openness, requires a different strength than the world recognizes. It is not the strength of resistance, but the strength of surrender. Not the strength of controlling, but the strength of allowing. not the strength of armoring, but the strength of remaining open despite the pain. And that strength confuses the world, because it seems like weakness, because it does not defend itself, because it does not attack, because it simply remains vulnerable and present, without pretending to be something else. Conscious souls disturb because they reject the game of power. They do not compete for dominance. They do not seek to control others. They do not need to win to feel valuable. They have discovered a different power, one that does not depend on the submission of others, one that is not exhausted by being shared. It is the power of presence, the power of being completely here, completely now, without agenda. And that power is more threatening than any form of domination because it cannot be defeated with conventional weapons. You cannot intimidate someone who does not fear. You cannot manipulate someone who sees through manipulation. You cannot control someone whose center is within themselves. Ibn Arabi taught that true knowledge is knowing that you do not know, that wisdom begins when you admit your ignorance. And conscious souls embody that paradox. They do not pretend to know what they do not know. They do not feign certainties they do not have. Their power lies in their humility, in their willingness to say, "I do not know," in a world that punishes uncertainty. And that humility, that honesty about the limits of knowledge, is revolutionary, because it disarms hierarchies based on the pretension of knowing, because it questions authorities that derive their power from asserting absolute certainties, because it invites everyone to recognize their own fundamental ignorance. But recognizing one's own ignorance is terrifying. It means releasing intellectual crutches. It means facing mystery without the protection of explanations. It means admitting that you control nothing, that you have never controlled anything, that your entire life you have been improvising in darkness pretending to see, and that admission is too much for many. So they prefer to reject the messenger. They prefer to label conscious souls as confused, lost, weak, because it is easier than admitting that maybe, just maybe, they are the ones lost in a dream of false certainty. Conscious souls learn to live with discomfort. They learn that their path will be lonely in important ways. They learn that not everyone can accompany them where they go, and they learn to be okay with that. They do not seek to convert anyone. They do not need others to validate their experience. They do not require approval to continue their journey. They have found something within themselves that is more real, more solid, more reliable than any external validation. And that self-sufficiency, that internal completeness, is perhaps the most disturbing of all, because we live in a world of codependency, where everyone needs everyone, where value is derived from being needed, when someone does not need you in the expected way. When someone is complete in themselves, it creates an uncomfortable void. It is not that conscious souls do not value relationships. On the contrary, they value genuine connections deeply. But they do not depend on them for their sense of being. They are not defined by their relationships. They do not collapse when they are alone. And in a culture that equates love with need, with dependence, with fear of loss, someone who loves from freedom rather than attachment is incomprehensible. Their love does not possess. Their love does not demand. Their love does not condition. Ibn Arabi spoke of love as the very essence of existence. He said that everything in the universe is a manifestation of divine love seeking itself. And when a human being recognizes that, when they see love as the fundamental force that moves everything, their way of loving transforms. They no longer love to fill a void. They no longer love to obtain something. They love because that is their nature. They love because they cannot not love. They love without reason, without objective, without expectation of return. And that pure love, that love that asks nothing in return, is strange in a transactional world. It is suspicious, because if you want nothing from me, if you do not need me, if your love does not depend on my behavior, then what kind of love is that? It is the love that conscious souls discover, and it is the love that disturbs most because it cannot be manipulated, it cannot be earned, it cannot be lost. It simply is. Conscious souls live in constant tension. The tension between being in the world and not being of the world, between participating and observing, between acting and allowing. It is a delicate dance that is never completely mastered, that requires constant adjustment. Sometimes they lean too much toward participation and temporarily lose themselves in the drama. Sometimes they lean too much toward observation and disconnect from life. The balance is dynamic, always changing, never stable. And that instability is part of the discomfort, because they cannot offer a clear model to follow. They cannot say, "Do this and you will be awake." They do not have a guaranteed method. They only have their experience, unique and non-transferable, which can inspire but never be replicated. Ibn Arabi insisted that each soul has its own path to the divine, that no two journeys are identical, that what works for one can be poison for another, and conscious souls understand that. They respect the singularity of each path. They do not impose. They do not preach. They only share when asked, and even then with care, because they know that words can help or they can hinder, that what was liberating for one can be confusing for another, that timing matters as much as the message. So they speak with caution, measuring not only what they say but when and how they say it, and that caution, that deliberation, can seem like distance. It can be perceived as lack of passion or commitment, but it is the opposite. It is the deep care of one who knows the power of words, of one who understands that a word at the wrong moment can close doors that need to remain open. Conscious souls become careful with their energy. They learn that they cannot be available to everyone all the time, that they need to withdraw, regenerate, recenter, and that withdrawal can be misinterpreted as arrogance or disinterest. But it is not. It is self-care. It is recognizing that to give from fullness rather than lack, you need to keep your own cup full. You need to nourish your own flame before attempting to light others. And in a world that glorifies sacrifice, that celebrates those who consume themselves for others, someone who establishes healthy boundaries seems selfish. It seems they do not care. But the opposite is true. They care so much that they refuse to give from emptiness, because they know that helps no one. Ibn Arabi spoke of spiritual states as fluctuating, not permanent. He said that even the most elevated knowers go through periods of contraction and expansion, of clarity and confusion, and conscious souls live that fluctuation intensely. They are not always awake. They are not always at peace. They are not always clear. They have moments of doubt, of fear, of contraction. They have days when consciousness seems to fade and they return to old patterns, and that imperfection makes them more human, more accessible, but also more vulnerable to criticism, because the world expects that if you have awakened, you remain awake. It expects consistency. It expects you to perfectly embody what you preach. And when they fail, when they show their humanity, their fragility, they are judged harshly. But Ibn Arabi taught that human perfection includes imperfection, that to be completely human means embracing all contradictions. That the spiritual path does not eliminate the human, it transforms it by integrating it. And conscious souls embody that integration. They are not flawless saints. They are human beings who have seen something more, who have touched something deep, but who continue navigating life with all its complexities and challenges. Their discomfort for the world does not come from their perfection, but from their authenticity, from their refusal to pretend to be more than what they are, from their honesty about their struggles, from their vulnerability in admitting they do not have all the answers. And that authenticity, that naked humanity, is the most disturbing of all, because it challenges our fantasies about enlightenment, because it demonstrates that awakening does not make you special, it just makes you more real. And reality, without adornments or illusions, is something most prefer to avoid. The journey of consciousness is not about becoming someone different. It is about removing the layers that have hidden who you always were. It is archaeology of the soul, excavating through centuries of conditioning to find the original face, the one you had before the world told you who to be. And when you catch glimpses of that original face, you realize how much energy you have spent maintaining the constructed one, how exhausting it is to be someone you are not, how liberating it would be to simply drop the performance. But that liberation terrifies, because if you are not who you have been pretending to be, then the relationships built on that pretense collapse. The identity you have defended crumbles. The life you have carefully constructed reveals itself as a house of cards. And who wants to face that destruction, even knowing that something more authentic waits on the other side? Conscious souls have faced that destruction. They have watched their carefully constructed identities dissolve. They have felt the terror of not knowing who they are, They have stood in the ruins of their former lives and wondered if anything real remained. And they discovered that everything real remained, that only the false had burned away, that underneath all the performance was something indestructible, something that had always been there, patiently waiting to be recognized. That discovery changes everything, because once you know what is real, you cannot unknow it. Once you have tasted authenticity, everything else tastes like ash, and you would rather be alone in your truth than surrounded by others in a shared lie. This is why conscious souls often find themselves on the margins, not because they chose exile, but because they could not remain in spaces that demanded falseness. They could not keep performing when the performance had died within them. They could not speak the language everyone else spoke when that language no longer meant anything. So they left, or they were pushed out, and they found themselves in the wilderness between worlds, no longer belonging to the sleeping world, but not yet arrived at whatever comes next, suspended in the unknown, with only their direct experience as a compass. Ibn Arabi called this state barzakh, the isthmus between two oceans, a place that belongs to neither one world nor the other, yet touches both. And conscious souls inhabit that barzakh. They bridge worlds. They translate between languages. They remember what the sleeping world has forgotten while participating in its daily rituals. It is an exhausting position, to be the bridge, to be the translator, to be the one who sees both sides while most see only one. But it is also necessary, because without those who inhabit the threshold, there would be no passage from one world to the other, no one to show that crossing is possible. Conscious souls disturb because they are proof that the crossing is possible, that you do not have to remain asleep, that there is another way, and that proof is either deeply inspiring or deeply threatening depending on where you stand. If you are tired of sleeping, if you are exhausted by the performance, if you are ready to face what is real, then conscious souls are guideposts showing you the way. Their very existence gives you permission to begin your own journey. They prove that you can survive the dissolution of identity and find something more authentic on the other side. But if you are invested in the dream, if your identity depends on maintaining the illusion, if you have too much to lose by waking up, then conscious souls are existential threats. They destabilize your carefully maintained world. They question everything you have built. They represent the possibility of a collapse you are not ready to face. And so you reject them. You dismiss them. You pathologize them. You do whatever is necessary to neutralize the threat they represent, not because they are doing anything to you, but because their existence reminds you of the choice you are making, to stay asleep. That choice is valid. There is no judgment in recognizing that not everyone is ready to wake up, that the timing is different for each soul, that what looks like cowardice might simply be wisdom about one's own readiness. But there is also compassion. Compassion for those caught in the dream, suffering unnecessarily, believing their suffering is inevitable. Compassion for those who do not yet know there is another way. Compassion even for those who attack the messenger, because their attack reveals their pain. Conscious souls learn to hold both, the truth that everyone is exactly where they need to be, and the compassion that wishes to alleviate suffering. The acceptance of each person's journey, and the availability to help when help is requested. The respect for free will, and the willingness to be a catalyst for those ready to transform. It is a delicate balance, to be available without pushing, to share without proselytizing, to witness without judging, to care without attachment to outcome. And in that balance, conscious souls find their purpose, not to save the world, not to wake everyone up, but to be authentic in their own living, trusting that authenticity is contagious, that one genuine life gives permission for others to be genuine, that one person living from truth creates space for others to discover their own truth. This is the quiet revolution of consciousness. Not loud, not dramatic, just authentic humans living authentically, creating ripples in the collective consciousness, making it slightly easier for the next person to wake up. And so what will you do? Will you reject the discomfort conscious souls create? Will you defend your sleep against their implicit invitation to wake? Or will you allow that discomfort to be what it is, an invitation to something more real, more alive, more true than the life you have been living? The choice is always yours. And whatever you choose, conscious souls will remain, living their truth, offering their mirror, waiting for those ready to see.